Okay. And we are live. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see everyone again. It's great to see everyone joining in the chat. We'll see as everyone comes into the meeting. Hope you guys had a brilliant October. It's been nice, Hope you enjoyed everything. And for those who celebrate Sukkot, I hope you guys had an incredible Sukkot and enjoyed yourself. Personally, me and the EWHAL family have been down in Davenport, Florida with the Sefer group celebrating Sukkot. And that was a brilliant time, tabernacling with everyone, talking and sharing and ministering. I was doing worship with Mark Marshall and Steve Hall, and that was a brilliant time. And listening to the words of our guest speakers, Stephen Pidgeon and John Hallam, Stacey Hubbard, Jessica Knock. Brilliant time. I enjoyed Sukkot this year, and I hope that you that celebrate Sukkot had a brilliant time as well celebrating it. And it's nice to be back on these regular Tuesday night programs. Hey, Sue. Hey, David. Hey, Johnny. It's lovely to see everyone in the chat. But it's nice being back. We've been gone for 2 weeks doing the meetings, so I haven't been sitting behind the scenes managing stuff for a while. So it's nice being back and all of you joining us. So I can't wait to get into the program. But anyhow, hope you guys had that brilliant Sukkot. Blind Mac, Before we get into the main program, with Gary Wayne talking about Canaan, I wanted to talk about something that's happening in the local area, as in where EWHAL is based, which is in Leicestershire. We are doing a local event in Lutterworth. Now, we are getting a museum exhibition for the Sefer Scriptures. Now, this is due to the work that EWHAL has been doing for the past couple of years and the work that we're going to be doing with Sefer in the future. Now, this links back into the feasts. As you know, we all just came from Sukkot. We all just celebrating the feast. However we do it, with friends and family, with strangers alike, whatever we were doing, we all just came from celebrating it. EWHAL has been doing Sukkot and Passover and Shavuot in Leicestershire, particularly in a town called Lutterworth, a market town known for Bible translation. It is the Bible Belt of England. That's what it's known for. John White comes from there, the Good News Bible, and many other historical figures like Frank Whittle, who made the jet engine. But they're on different topics. But we have been doing our events there for the past 4 to 5 years, along with the Sefer Publishing Group, bringing Dr. Stephen Pidgeon down to speak about the Sefer, to speak about the feast, and to bring it into England. We've been doing this for so many years, and we've been doing this since COVID happened. And we have been a very vital thing in restoring that town and bringing back an economy to it and making the high street alive again, giving local businesses people to shop with and giving the town something new and living to carry on and make themselves a new tourist attraction, a new place for people to visit. And so we got in contact with the local museum, and the local museum said that they would love to have us do a exhibition on the Sefer Scriptures. And so we're happy to announce, and we've been announcing this for the past while, you may have seen the ads, we are going to be doing the exhibition on the 15th of November. There will be 2 sittings at 3 and 6. There is a link in the description for full information on the matter, so you can see everything that you may want to know about it. But the exhibition will start with someone from the musician talking about John Wycliffe, who he was, why he's called the Morning Star, why his work was so impactful for the Reform movement in us now. He's the reason we have Bibles in our language, in English, in French, in all these languages. He started this from the Latin Vulgate into English, and he allowed that torch to be passed on all the way through the Reformation up till now with modern day translations like the Sefer. So it's incredible that we now get to have a display set up right next to the John Wycliffe display, right next to his works, original parchment, the history, the facts about him. It's a privilege, and we're very thankful for this. They're going to be having an expert who's going to be talking about John Wycliffe at the start and the significance of Lutterworth, the work he did there, what they have about him. And you can speak to the expert if you want to, if you're into John Wycliffe. But also, we're going to have Dr. Stephen Pidgeon there talking about the Sefer Scriptures. We're going to be speaking about the local connection in the town, doing the feasts, what the feasts are, because we're going to have many people there who obviously aren't in Torah, who may be Christians, who don't do the feasts, or secular and don't know anything about Christianity or Torah. So we're going to have Stephen talking about this, the Sefer itself, how it's translated, what makes it different from regular Bible, transliteration compared to translation, and the key thing, the way, the truth, and the life. The new 66 canon of the Sefer, which I think is going to tear down every wall that has been built up all across England that is stopping us from spreading the names of Yehusha and Yah and the Ruach HaKodesh. I think the scripture is going to do incredible things, not just in England, but in Europe, in America, in Australia. and we're going to be launching it there. We're going to have a couple copies, hopefully, with us there that we can sell in person. So if you come down, you can get yourself an early copy of it. And then not long after, we should be selling online it as well for mass orders or smaller orders, congregational, But I can't wait for it. And I do think the Separate Way, Truth, and the Life, this 66 canon, is going to be something to truly allow people to come in about the fear of these extra books, about the fear, the stigma attached to it. They can walk into a church and they don't have to deal with the Aleph Tav on the front. They have to deal with that because it says the way, the truth, and the life, the message of the Messiah to all of us and how we live for an eternal life. That's what it is. And it's going to bring that, it's going to unite us. And so I cannot wait at all for doing this museum tour and then to be selling this book to everyone. It's going to be brilliant. And I would highly advise you join. And the museum tour isn't its only thing that's happening. We're also going to be doing a string quartet concert with a local and international band called Lumos. Lumos has multiple different groups that play a variety of different artists. Again, the link is available in the description if you want to go and see what we're offering. They're going to be doing 2 concerts at different times compared to the 2 tours we're doing. So you can go to a tour and then go to a concert. They're brilliant concerts. I went to go and see them back in the summer. They have around 1,000 candles. They have 3 people on stage playing different stringed instruments, and they do lovely renditions of songs. And in the winter months in England, it'll be brilliant. And hopefully Lutterworth will have its lights set up for the Christmas market. And so Lutterworth will look even more lovely at this time of year. So I can't wait for this. And I would highly advise people to come down, whether it's just for a string quartet, or it's to see the history of Lutterworth, or it's to see what is going to happen in the local area, the Sefer translation and the launch of The Way, the Truth, and the Life. I highly advise people to come down and see it, if you're able to, of course. Otherwise, hopefully we'll have something recorded online for you to see, so you can see Stephen and the local expert on John Wycliffe talking online. But now, minus me talking about all the things that are happening soon, I want to get into the meat of the program. So as everyone knows, we have Gary Wayne joining us today, and he's going to be talking on, the general idea is Canaan. We're going through 4 chapters today. Chapter 31. So I'm just getting the chapter names up, everyone. We're going for chapter 31, Forging the Nation of Destiny. In chapter 32, the Nephilim Wars. Chapter 33, the Holy Covenant. And chapter 34, Jericho. They all involve on Canaan. The land of Canaan, the people that lived there, the deities they worshipped and why they worshipped them, their history, and why the Israelites were special. And we're going to delve into topics like how most secular scholars think the Israelites just popped out of Canaan and the Exodus story was fabricated, which is a fabricated history. Gary Wayne's going to delve into his thoughts on that, what he believes about this, and about their doctrine, how it differs from the doctrine you see in Canaan. The fallen Elohims that run around the landscape and that were corrupting the true word of Yah. He's going to be talking about this. He's going to be expressing what's happening down there, the history around it, why it was so important that the Israelites were separated out with a unique covenant and were delivered into this land, and the future references this holds, and just the general history of the land. It's going to be a very fascinating, very deep conversation on the land of Canaan, and I can't wait for it. We won't be having Stephen joining us for the next couple of weeks because he's traveling around. So I hope you guys can bear with that having Stephen for the next 2 weeks, but he will be back eventually. So today's program will just be Gary Wayne, me, and Stacey Hubbard talking about Canaan. So I'm going to bring them up so we can get straight into this. Okay. Hey, guys.
Hey, Dolph. Gary.
Hello. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you back, Gary. It's nice to be on regular Tuesday programming. Okay.
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, Gary, do you want to go? You want to get started?
Yeah. So, thank you for inviting me back. So happy to be here, and
right,
thinking that we'll have a very interesting conversation today as we talk about some, I think, very important chapters within the book that are very important for Christians. And one of the things that I liked about book 1 that I was hoping would happen is that when I started to get into some things in the Old Testament, that it might actually bring the Old Testament to life, so that it's not just sort of this dry listing of genealogies and events, and that, it's just, because as a Christian, we're sort of bound into buying into that every detail is important in the Bible. So, and they are, but unless you know the context, which isn't often taught in churches, then not only will you not understand the details, you won't pay attention to those details, and you're more easily deceived or misled. And people can throw doubt into your faith. So in the Old Testament and the time of Israel is kind of one of those focal points that polytheists and seculars just love to point their, so to speak, guns at to try and delegitimize the Bible. So it's important to understand this as a Christian. I know we're expected to have faith, but some of us aren't built the same way as other ones, and I'm a contrarian, so I want to know. I want to get into it. So that's kind of what I do. And so forging the nation of destiny is the chapter that we're starting with. And I felt that it was important to explain this in a way that maybe most people haven't been explained this period of time and the nation of Israel in. And we sort of get sort of a diluted sort of version of this that comes down through the teachings. And so it's important to understand what Israel is going through and what they're up against and the context and the background of what's happening around them. So as we look at Israel in this part of the book where I am at and telling the history, and again, we've just come off of the chapters of Nimrod, the 4 chapters of Nimrod, and we've explained some inexplicable peoples and associations in the chapters before in this section. Israel is coming out of the empire of Egypt in the Exodus and the conquest of the covenant land. And what's important to understand about just that aspect of it is that Israel was raised into a nation. It was like the womb of the nation where the 70 sons of Jacob bore their children, and they grew into a large nation that was enslaved, and they were fed on polytheism. So this was a nation that didn't have this deeply rooted monotheistic faith that Abraham would have had, or Jacob would have had, or Joseph would have had. It's been sort of through 400 years.
Been muddled and lost.
And at least 200 years, depending on how you want to spin that history, not spin, but understand that history, it's at least 200, maybe as many as 300 years under polytheism. That monotheism teachings that they originally had when they were few was no longer holding the same sort of influence as you would expect. And that just the notion of Egypt is important to understand for how we understand the world and what rolls downstream. Egypt is the first post-Diluvian beast empire. Mm-hmm. And I know we can look at Daniel 8 and get to the 7, and they're not in conflict. They're telling different aspects of prophecy. So we need to understand both. And we're not provided the 2 before the 4 beast empires in Daniel 7. But you can look at either Babel or it's extended Assyria, or both as one. But the first beast empire that Israel is dealing with, Abraham obviously was dealing with Nimrod and the Mesopotamians, but it's as a nation as Israel, they are going to first encounter Egypt. So I list them as the first beast empire, and I look more of Syria as the second beast empire. Mm-hmm. And Israel has a relationship with all of the beast empires. And that's something that nobody tends to talk about. So there's a relationship as they're raised in Egypt. There's a relationship as Assyria is going to act for God and brought on the northern kingdom and would have been the southern kingdom, except that they repented. They were there to apply the curses of the covenant that we're going to talk about in the show. The blessings and the curses. This is, you don't follow the covenant, there's curses that were bound into that covenant. And understanding the covenant's also important. So when we get into Persia and the Medes, in terms of those two empires, Persian and Babylon, and then into Greece, they all have an intimate relationship with Israel as well, just as Rome will have, and will cause the diaspora and bring another covenant curse to the southern kingdom, just as Babylon brings the curse that Judah escaped beforehand. And the end time empire will have a relationship with Israel as well, including the Antichrist. So this is important to understand the overall context, and that these leaders of these beast empires almost have a number of their kings, at least one in each, that's going to be almost like an Antichrist wannabe figure like Nimrod, except he's not permitted because it's not the ordained time to reach that status. And so it's that beast empire relationship. The first thing I wanted to underline, after how polytheistic Israel would have been or influenced by as they're coming out. And this is not a nation prepared for war.
No, they were just slaves. They were slaves that were leaving the land, going into a land that's been established for so many years. See cities like Jericho, it's a military city. You know, they weren't made to do that.
You know, they were as I call them, a ragtag nation of slaves fleeing a beast empire who they need protection from, that God is going to pour the Red Sea over top of to ensure that they're going to escape. And then this ragtag, non-trained military moving nation that does the feast of the Lord. I'm almost like a movable feast, so to speak, but that's, you know, taking two concepts and combining them. But they're going to send now scouts into Canaan.
Yeah.
And there's going to be 12 of those scouts, and 10 of them are going to be absolutely terrified.
Yeah, they were the bad report. Yeah, how they were scared.
Yeah. So, and this is the land that God has gifted them. And it's important to know that is God's gift. That's the inheritance reserved for Israel. And as we've talked about in shows past, the Council of the Gods rule over the 70 nations in this world. And they all have, of those 70 gods, a portion allotted to them. God has a portion that's the covenant land, from Mount Hermon to the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and to the south, to the Nile, to the Euphrates. And that's the land that God is going to gift to Abraham and his descendants. And this is a land that isn't defenseless people that are living in that whole region. This is a land of the most military, mighty nations on the earth after the destruction of Egypt. And so this ragtag nation of people are going to send these scouts into Canaan, and they're going to see the Anakim giants and people taller than them. And the scouts are going to tell them, the terrified ones are going to try and scare them to death. Don't go in. This land will devour us. This land has giants in them, and ones that are still taller than us are maybe declared as who the Anakim are. And they hold sway over it. So one of the biggest faith tests comes very quickly after leaving Israel, and they fail miserably. Joseph and Caleb, they're reporting accurately, and Deuteronomy 1 reasserts all of these details of the accurate part, so we can take that away from the embellished part that the terrified scouts are doing. But they're not ready to move up and continue on the way to on what you would call the highway of the spies, the way of Ephraim, is what we would know it biblically as. And so they're going to be directed towards the desert, and God's going to have to deal with these individuals. And so another thing crops up in the same period to show you not only is that faith not forged yet, but how easily they are persuaded to go back into polytheism. So in chapter 31, I lead the chapter with the opening with Exodus 32, 3 through 4. And this is a modern translation I'm using in book one, because I'm trying to hit all aspects of people and in a language that they're not going to struggle with in terms of the KJV language. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." After all of the miracles that Jesus had, or Jesus as God, Jehovah the Elohim, would have performed with the Israelites in Egypt, and then wiping out the army, giving them a land that he said he is going to fight for them for and be with them and not to fear.
They're still scared after all of that. If I saw an ocean collapse on my enemy's army, if I saw those plagues get rained down, my faith would be there forever. But they got comfortable in it, and they just went. Actually, I hear stories about these other guys being able to do it. They're just stories, They want to turn back to it.
And they didn't create a new religion with this idol worship. This was the gods of Egypt. This is the bull cult. This is the calf cult, calf bull, and the sun worshiping cult. And so they were saying, let's go back to what we learned in Egypt. This is the worship of the Uraeus angels. Those are serpentine angels that are depicted, and flying seraphim, just as Baal and the Baalim Council of Canaan were all Uraeus gods, just as Osiris was, and their group of gods. I won't say the consort so that the show gets taken down. But they were Uraeus gods. These were the most common gods. These are the serpentine gods that you see in the pantheons. And that's the sun bull worshiping cult that crosses over the flood that we've talked about in bad shows. So this is done when Moses leaves them for a short period of time, where he's going up to the mountain to be with God to receive the law. So it's not like this takes place in a long period of time, but their faith is so low that they're going to quickly say, what are we going to do? We're going to die in the desert. We have all of these enemies. We're surrounded. So we're going to be like the other nations. We're going to go back to polytheism. And also in this area, in this time frame, is this war against the Amalekites and the Amalekim. And this is at Rephidim. And again, they're not armed. They have no manufacturing facility to make weapons. They don't have chariots. They probably don't have any horses. They don't have armor. They don't have much for swords. And with the destruction of the Egyptian Empire, the Amalekites are one of the greatest military nations on the planet at that time, I would say, right there with the Philistines, and maybe even a little bit greater in terms of their descriptions of that period of time. And so the Amalekites are going to track them with their army, and they're going to attack Israel and the stragglers, and they're going to say, we're cousins. And people don't understand the relationship here when they just see Amalekites. Well, there's two races, as we've covered in past shows, of who the Amalekites are. One are the Amalekim giants that show up in Genesis 14 that predate the Amalekites, that are created as a new hybrid nation in Genesis 36. So a few generations and a fair bit of number of years in between there. And that nation that is created as the hybrids, it comes from Eliphaz, son of Esau, who's going to marry Timnah, the pure blood Horim giant of the Edom area, as we would understand it, the Mount Sinai area, one of the dukes of Edom, and are going to create a new dynasty and people of hybrids, of Edomites and of Horim. And these are going to be what we know as the Horites, as the hybrid, versus the Horim as the pureblood giant. It would be nice if the translators got the consistency of those tribes with that suffix to denote it more easily. And we know Horim are giants because we get that in Deuteronomy 2, just as Anakim are giants and Raphaim giants, a specific kind of giant, it would seem, that are distinct from the Nephilim. So this tribe is waiting to ambush Israel at their most weakest point ever. It would be akin to the Egyptians, and a punishment that should come along with it accordingly, which does, but it will be many generations before that comes about. We'll cover that in a future chapter. And that eventually the Amalekites say, and the Amalekites are going to, as they start to populate, and Amalek, who is the son of Timnah and Eliphaz, they're going to move over to Petra. Petra is obviously a famous location and home of the Amalekim and the Gebulim giants. Heavily populated. Gebulim were also in the northern tier area as well, as the Bible talks about, but two tribes, Amalekim, are the most important ones, and they're seemingly named after that tribe of giants that predates them. And so it's going to be a combination of giants and hybrid giants that are going to come out to track Israel. And they're calling them cousins. Why? Because Esau, father of Eliphaz, is the brother of Jacob, who stole, in his opinion and in the accounts, deceived Jacob to not only get the Messianic promise, but to take the blessings and the inheritance. Now, all of that nation is there together. It's like at Babel. If you were to wipe humans from the face of the earth, things would be over at the Tower of Babel, and that's why God wanted us to go down from the mountain and spread around the world. But they chose not to at the beginning, so you had the confusion of the language. Now you have something kind of similar, where you have all of Israel together and weak. And so they're going to try and wipe them from the face of the earth. And in Old Testament law, they would inherit the blessing, the inheritance, and the Messianic promise with a hybrid Nephilim or Rephaim giant race and a dragon Messiah. Like the stakes were big. And so they can't fight and win against the Amalekites, which is why we get the famous accounting of Moses and having him assisted to have his arms lifted up to hold up so that they can win. This is done for them as well. And God is showing them, even though they are stiff-necked, that I will fight for you. And that doesn't get the faith forged for them either. So if they're going to be a nation that is going to go on and go up against a land that is ravaged and corrupted with all the crimes, but by powerful giant and hybrid giant nations waiting in ambush like the Amalekites, who stirred up those other nations to war against them after the whooping they took at Rephidim, that they would have to have not only some military training, some ability to manufacture on-the-go weapons, but they would have to have faith, and they would have to follow the instructions of God if they were going to be successful to the letter, which is a very high standard. And we need to understand to the level, this was a nation of priests raised into a nation for a special destiny. So that was going to require 40 years of forging of that faith in the desert, so that they would be ready, and that none of that original generation who did not accept the teachings of Moses, did not accept the miracles and the protection of God, would not be permitted to go into the covenant land. except for Joshua. Even Moses isn't going to go into the covenant land, but that's for a different reason, as the time in the desert would sort of bring about. So I just thought I'd let you guys back in there, but I just wanted to talk about what was going on in terms of the context around why I put in the chapter of the forging of the destiny.
Right. So this whole thing, why all these beings and these Amalekites and these different Horims and all the different hybrids, their whole premise and their whole purpose is to do what you just said when you were summing this up, is to get our birthright, our inheritance to this earth, correct? That's what this is all about.
Because at this point in time, we've had the flood, right? But the world reverts very quickly back to all polytheism. So the time of Abraham, he may be one of the few people following God at that time. And that the destiny for humankind is now resting on Abraham and then on Israel, so that we can be raised up to be like angels in the future time. And this is what is at stake. And all of these giant nations, through their gods, they don't know how this is going to come about, but what they do know is they need to destroy not only the Israelites, but humankind from the face of the earth, like they tried to do before the flood and why they were created. And it's just the Amalekites are kind of the focal point after the fall of Egypt, that they're doing the attack first, and then they're working to conspire with the other nations to take Israel down, and with other nations during the time of the judges, but rarely attacking Israel directly because of the whooping that they took.
Absolutely. And you said all those spies that sent out to see all this, they all had a spirit of fear, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb. And those are the only two that lasted and made it into the promised land, because the rest of them had a spirit of fear that Yah didn't want to bring into the camp. He wanted them to trust him. That's it. Just like our fathers want us to trust them. You know, when they tell us to do something, we do it, we get rewarded and we get blessed. That's how Yah is with us as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they are now going to be forged in the wilderness. So it's not going to be an easy life.
Well, they need it, because they showed their fear, and they showed they need the training. They're a nation of priests, you know, came out of Egypt with swords. They have nothing, exactly what you're saying. They need that training if they're going to be fighting against these giants.
And it's 40 years, and they move around the desert. So they're showing their ability to be nomadic, make weapons, train for war, develop their faith. It's still not going to be enough, right? And they're going to have a lot of setbacks. Nothing comes easy for Israel on this route. And you know, and in the time in the desert, Moses steps in because God is testing, I think, Moses and the Israelites to make sure before they move forward. But God is about to destroy the Israelites from the face of the earth and start over with Moses. So the people have to be bought in, is the lesson here. And he's looking for, are they going to buy in? Are they going to go after this into the wilderness, knowing that they may not be going into the covenant land, and they're going to have to live and survive there? This is, I mean, there's just so many different things that are going on. And so it's not an easy route. But by the end of the 40 years, Moses decides it's time, and they're going to move forward. So is there anything else you'd like to sort of talk about this period of time before I move on?
No, you covered that incredibly well. Yeah, you covered them, the forging of the nation out of Egypt and everything. We're going to be moving into the polytheism of Canaan, aren't we? That's next. Yes. Are we going to be talking about the polytheisticness of Egypt? Because obviously the gods that existed in Egypt that were influencing them before, because they turned back, as you said earlier, about when they were worshipping the calf, the golden calf. They turned back to those ways because they were scared and they had fear. and they decided it's easier to go back there and forget all the wonders we have now and what we could have because we're scared. You know.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say about that?
Well, I think that when we look at how things move forward, they're going to do similar things down the road.
Yes, the rebellions,
right? And that it may not be the Egyptian religion specifically that they're going to turn to, but the Baalim council, which the Bible talks about, is the predominant one that they're going to be falling away into many times over their history. And that the Baalim council are the ones that they're the same gods that are ruling Egypt. They just have different vernacular names. So Baal is Osiris.
It all traces back when you look at it and you compare it. They all trace back to each other. You can see the similarities.
Absolutely.
And the Baalim council of gods, and we get the word Baalim plural, so it's not a misprint there. I mean, they're talking about multiple gods here that are ruling from Mount Hermon, Mount Saphon in the Ugaritic text. This is from an outside source using a source language of original Semitic in the Ugaritic text for Hebrew. You can get direct relationships for the creation of the giants that are predominantly in the covenant land that worship the Baalim council. So Baal and Anat, these are the two chief gods after the flood versus Ashtaroth and El before the flood in the Canaanite pantheon. This is the same pantheon of Ugarit, where the Ugaritic text comes from. It's the same pantheon that's in Tyre and the Phoenicians. It's the same pantheon that's throughout the covenant land. It's the same pantheon, just with different vernacular names again, that the Philistines are worshiping. And Baal is going to be known by several different names, including Hadad. And if that name sounds familiar, that's because it's just a different name for the same god, as you get the kings of Hadad, the kings of Baal.
Yeah, the orders.
Right? And the Hadad, and it's particularly with the Edomite and Syrian, which are the same empire of their dynasties. And that the Baalim council are these serpentine gods that are going to be the ones that are presenting the prophets and the false prophets and the challenging of the monotheist religion. So when you look at that as a whole in the covenant land, they're all bound by the same religion. And the same religion that the Hittites worship, because they live amongst the giants, the same that the Amorites are, the same that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah have, the same that the Anakim have, the same that the Horim. It's all the whole, and there's a geopolitical network there that I get into a lot more detail in the wars in book 2, but I'll cover off some of that as we go through book 1's account of the Nephilim wars. And so this is who they're going up against. It's a common enemy bound by a religion, bound by oaths to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. So when people hear about seculars, polytheists, and many Christians saying, well, how can you accept that the Israelites would go into the land of the covenant and wipe out people who are defenseless? It's the other way around.
Right.
It is the other way around.
Yeah, it's absolutely opposite. And they were there waiting. They knew when they settled in there, this was God's land. They had their own gods. They were telling them. They were following the instructions from their gods to wipe Israel from the face of the earth so that they could continue to rule and justify the angelic rebellion. And so after 40 years, in Deuteronomy 1, we get sort of the start of this, and we get the recapping of what happened on the road, on the way of the spies, the way of Atharim, and they're going to go back in that direction. And this is kind of part of, again, the Nephilim wars, just as you have, we've covered off the War of Giants, just as we've covered off Rephidim. That was a war of giant with the Amalekites and the Amalekim. Now they're going to go back up the same road.
See, this is a beautiful explanation for why Israel is not just a Canaanite subsect, why they were completely different, and how they had a forged past that forged them to become what they are now. This explains it in a brilliant way, and it shows the importance of why they're trying to attack and fight them. You know, it sets them up as a different group.
Israelites were not Canaanites; they were an anathema. They were lower level of people. They were whatever pejorative you want to use. They did not look at Israel as a nation that should be on this face of the earth, not even as slaves. They just wanted, their duty was to slaughter them from the face of the earth. And so you wouldn't do that. And they didn't do that to each other. They would not wipe a full nation of giants and hybrids. They would just defeat them and then absorb them, right? They're not wanting to absorb the Israelites. They want to get that virus off the face of the earth, because they look at humans as a virus, as a parasite, as insects, just as they're, the giants sort of looked at us as insects or grasshoppers. And you sort of get that understanding again from that original accounting out of Numbers 13 with the spies. And so they're going to go back the way in, and God is going to test them again. And there's a lot of testing in this forging. And there's a king of Arad, and he has a pentapolis of cities there as well. And he's going to not permit them to come into the land of the covenant. And so Arad is located a little bit closer to the Dead Sea from where the way of Ephraim it is. So just to the east at the bottom end of the Dead Sea. And there's a road that goes into the way of Ephraim that's just north of Beersheba, and they're going to march out and they're going to war. And the Israelites are going to jump on it quickly, but they don't have the full backing of God. God doesn't tell them to go out. They're going to try and prove their faith without God directing them, and they get their butts whooped.
They get humiliated by it because they didn't go by Yah's commandments.
Exactly. And so this is part of the testing. This is part of the process. And so this king Arad is a giant. Arad is a giant name that is used more in the north and more in Phoenicia, where you get more of the Aradians in the Phoenician Empire. So this king Arad, and Arad is one of those patronymic king titles that passes on, like Talmai, for example, or Sheshai. Makkah is another one that you could use that comes from the north as well in there on the Mount Hermon reading. So in the second go around with King of Arad, everything goes differently, and they win rather easily. But what happens is that they now apply to the king of Edom to allow passage through, and they're not permitted. And seemingly God is more or less wanting to avoid the Philistines with the Israelites at this point in time, which are just to the east of them, where this battle was just taken from. And in fact, they're not even going to fight the Philistines in the Exodus wars. And that's how powerful they are. Now, with God's help, they could do it, but God is in a process here. And I think what he's doing is saying, okay, we're going to take you in a different direction. And when you find out and sort of put together who they're going to fight next, it's really tells you how powerful the Philistines must have been. So they apply to go through Edom and Moab and to go around to the east side of the Jordan River. But they're not permitted to go through. So God says, you're not going to attack Edomites, because some of the Edomites have gotten rid of some of the giants.
Mhm.
You're not going to attack the Moabites, and you're going to ask permission, but you're going to go around Edom and up, so south and around back through the desert, and then you're going to go up and around on the other side of the Jordan River, and you're going to go through Moab and Ammon. And as they're marching up, you've got kings of this area, and very powerful kings. And the first one that they're going to meet, and this is what I call in book 2 the Eastern Campaign, they're going to go up against Sihon. Some people think Sihon is the brother of Og, and he may be. He's certainly an ally and a friend, and they're in an alliance together east of the Jordan River. And even Sihon will have some cities and Pentapolis on the west side of the Jordan River as well. And he's got well over 30 cities. I could only count up to about 34, but typically they use a Pentapolis. So 5 cities that work in a uniform state, just like you have the 5 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, the 5 cities of Philistine. So I think he probably had 40. And I get there because King Og actually has a bigger empire. He has 60 cities, and they're all named, and that's 12 Pentapolis that work together. So the next one up is 35. So he either Sihon would either have 35 or maybe he has 40, but he's powerful. And they are kings in the Bashan greater region. Og is further north and rules from Edrei and Ashtaroth and in the Bashan region, and you've got King Og just below, and then you have the Midianites. And there's a Pentapolis of 5 kings of the Midianites as well. So the first one that Israel is going to take on is they're going to take on Sihon, because he won't let them pass through their land. Like, they want to get to a point where they can cross over at Jericho is where they end up crossing down the road. But Sihon, he knows what has happened, right, with the Egyptians. They know what have happened with the Amalekites and the Amalekim and the Aradians that at the battle of Atharim. And so they're not going to move out and take on Israel in the wars, but God's with them. And they're going to take them down anyways and slaughter them. And it's the only way they can win is showing the faith. And then Og, who should have marched out in support, underestimated the ability of God and the Israelites. And King Og is going to march out after Sihon has been defeated. No point sitting behind your high fortress city-states. And these are city-states with walls, as the Bible describes them, as walls up to the sky. They should be like impenetrable. This is the state-of-the-art defense of the time, designed to stop powerful giants from getting in. And this ragtag slave of giants just blew through these fortresses with Sihon. So Og says, well, I'm going to fight you in the open battle. So I'm throwing in my own speculation here. And why die as cowards on the inside? That's if we're going to die, which I don't think we will. But, let's fight. I'm going to meet you guys on the open country. And of course, they get wiped out. So now you've just had arguably 94 to 100 cities conquered of these 2 empires. But they're not done yet. They are going to now attack the 5 kings of Media for the crimes that they committed against Israel. And they were trying to have, as they were in the desert, working with Balaam to curse Israel and to lead Israel away is the other aspect of it. For those crimes, Moses is going to march on the 5 kings of the Midianites, who are part of the Og Empire. They are vassal alliance people, and they are also ruled over by hybrids, because they rule over all of the cities of the time, or direct Rephaims. But because they're Midianites, they could have had Rephaim kings, or they could have been hybrid, like Amalek, as a hybrid of Horim and Eliphaz, ruled over the Amalekites. And they defeat them easily and put those 5 to death. So you have, another 5 kings of city-states that are put to death, and the list is mounting, and that's just the Eastern campaign. And Og is the last of the giants, the last of the Rephaim giants, however you want to interpret that. That could be interpreted as the last of the survivors that might have survived the flood, or he's the last of the first incursion after the flood of the original Rephaim. But whichever is, he's the remnant. He is the last survivor of the giants, Rapha, as you take that back to the Hebrew. So, and he is the most powerful of these giants. I mean, 60 pentapoles.
Right.
We talked about how powerful and mean the Philistines were, and they only had 5. They had 1 pentapolis, 5 city-states. But this is who they took on. So if they weren't ready for the Philistines, but they were ready for what they just did east of the Jordan River, how powerful was that alliance of hybrids and many kinds of giants with the Philistines that we'll talk more about down the road? But right now we're just on the Eastern campaign. And then after this, Moses dies. He's not permitted to go into the land of the covenant, and Joshua is going to be promoted, and they're going to camp directly across from Jericho.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of the people, the secular people and people in the church get upset when Yah tells Joshua, Yah tells him to kill them all, the women, the children, the sheep, and all that, because they're all corrupted. Those hybrids messed with the animals as well as the children and everything. That's why they had to get rid of them all. But a lot of times they didn't do that. And when they didn't do that, they had to fight them again in a different place. And so it just kept happening over and over.
And there's 2 sets of obligations. And one is any of those people and tribes inside the covenant land, nobody was to live. You weren't to keep the animals, and not to intermarry. But outside, you could play with that a little bit. There's the 2 different sort of standards within the covenant land and outside the covenant land, that they were conquering. And that's all bound into the Holy Covenant. That's in the going to war edicts that were set down, that are going to be in play when David and Saul become kings. Right. They're the obligations to finish what Israel had started, but against people that wouldn't even let them pass through their land.
Right.
Either one of them could have let them cross into the Jordan River and say, hey, this isn't my problem. You're going there. I don't want anything to do with you. I know what you did to Arad. I know what you did to the Amalekites. I know what you did to the Egyptians. But God hardened the hearts, as we're told in the Bible, of Og and Sihon. And all that means is he permitted them to show their hubris. That was already there. So just bring it to the surface, and not to think with their brain, but to think with their passion and their loyalty to their pantheons.
And their pride to show who was the toughest. So that's probably why King Og allowed the other king to get beat, so he could say, I'll come save you. They were very prideful.
So anything else you want to cover off on this part of the campaign, or?
No.
Okay.
Well, you guys said it very good. Yeah. No, I had something in my head. I did have something. I'm trying to remember it.
You're rolling, Gary. Keep
I'm
rolling.
I'll figure it out.
No worries. No worries. So I'm going to leave Jericho. I have that in chapter, I think 34. So when they cross over, but when we talked about the geopolitical organizational structure of the covenant land, I've already covered off the Gaza region of the Philistines. We understand the region of Edom in the south, where you have the Horim, the Horites, the Amalekim, and the Amalekites down south. You also have, just so we've talked about, we have Amorites and Rephaim in the Mount Hermon region, and just south of that, and the Midianites on just east of the Jordan River as well. Well, you have in the War of Giants back in Genesis 14, you had the Mesopotamian giants warring first against this empire east of the Jordan River and went into Mount Hermon and defeated the Rephaim there first, right? So that shows you how powerful these alliances are and how long they held, because this is over 400 years later, right? And now they're going to move into other alliances as well. So understand that the Philistine Confederacy has a link with the Southern Confederacy of Giants, or the Southern Alliance of Giants that we've talked about, that would also have a relationship with some of the Anakim as well. Anakim are also part of the Philistine group of nations after Philistines expropriated the land. In fact, the Anakim are going to have two cities within that Pentapolis, just as the Avim are going to have another city within that Pentapolis, and two cities are left for the Philistines and people that can come over from Crete. Within the central region, you are going to have another central alliance of giants. And then in the north, you're going to have another alliance of giants. And this is how we understand the campaign. And these are confederacy of giants, right? And these ones are working with each other, particularly after what happens to Og and Sihon. And so you're going to have a campaign where, and again, I cover this off in more detail in book 2, but I just wanted to give the geopolitical nature for Joshua crossing over and starting at Jericho with the Central Alliance. And so you're going to have Anakim giants, Hivim giants. You're going to have a nation that is going to be a very important nation as it goes downstream, that would be understood as the Hivim one. And I'm struggling to come up with the name of this city, but the ones that Joshua, the Gibeonites, Gibeon. The Gibeonites are going to make a treaty with Joshua, and God's going to honor that, even though Joshua has been deceived. But the Gibeonites have a pentapolis of giants as well. And when you look at the books of Joshua, and I think it's in chapters 10 and 11, you have the Gibeonites described as Hivites, or actually Hivim. And Gibeon is one of, if not the most powerful capital of the Gibeonim pentapolis. And so when they make a treaty with Joshua, you have all the other kings within the Central Alliance so upset they want to go wipe out the Gibeonites and the Gibeonim first. And so that's all part of the central war that's being fought against. But understand, there's many different kinds of giants. And then you have King Jabin of the north. And he's got a whole list of cities and peoples. And Jabin is another patronymic name for northern kings. And so again, won't go too deep into this, because if we do ever do book 2, that's where I put out more details. But I just want to put the wars of the giants that I'm covering off more from an overview in chapter in this chapter, the Nephilim Wars, that Joshua is going to have to take all of them, and then he's going to have to go south again and do the mountain campaign that goes back into the Hebron area to do cleanups, because there's still giants there. And in fact, there's going to be more giants resurfacing all the way through that they're going to have to deal more with, particularly in the Hebron area, which is where the spies were saying the Anakim giants in. So this was a very complex, long war. And so how were they able to do it? Well, with the help of God.
Mhm.
Sometimes we see God stepping in with, hail and fire and things like that. But what we get told 3 times is that God would send hornets
Mhm.
to discombobulate the giants. And the giants, when they're discombobulated, they would be confused. They might even start attacking themselves. They are in an absolute state of panic over hornets. So there has to be more going on there.
Mhm.
But, and there is, I think. So what would happen with that discombobulation? It allowed the Israelites to literally walk up. If they needed to, they could take them out at the knees if they wanted to bring them down, and then take the head, right? To make sure that they're going to stay dead. Because Rephaim had healing powers. They could heal themselves and others.
Mhm.
So they were hard to kill, which is why you take the head of a giant. Again, we've covered that off in past shows.
Mhm.
But just to underline what's going on, well, they believe in the religion of the giants, and downstream, even to this day, that they had telepathy at that point in time. And that they were like a hive, where you had the queen at the top of the hierarchy of the pantheon, like a Sophia or of Gnosticism. And so the queen bee would communicate with all of the bees. And in this case, it was like a hive mind, because they could work together and they could talk telepathy. And they said, and even to this day, the royals will say, who talk about this, will say that it allowed them to do things you couldn't achieve otherwise by working together. So it's that bee imagery that shows up in some of the royals, like the Anjou, for example. And so when you see bees and polytheism, or the hive mind, understand they're talking in polytheist terms.
Mhm.
The hornet is the natural enemy of the bee.
Mhm.
That's what God sent them. No defense against that.
Mhm.
And it just did not permit them to communicate. They learned how to fight through linked minds. That's
Mhm.
how they operated, and were unable to do so, or adequately, so much so it would discombobulate them. That's likely the most effective thing. And one also would think that God would have added some additional strength to them to endure through those long battles, and some, along with their training to win. So this was a supernatural war Israel was fighting against odds that they had no chance of winning. And only when they followed God's laws to the letter,
Mhm.
his commandments to the letter, did they win. And they were punished brutal, trying to say, in a brutish sort of manner, as
Mhm.
we would look at it without understanding, when they didn't follow those letters to the law. And that would also continue throughout the covenant. You receive the blessings if you follow the covenant. You
And
receive the curses if you do not.
Yeah, and you can see those blessings in action, This ragtag group of ex-slaves coming through the land and causing all this disruption and scaring these giants, You can understand why they're scared, why they had fear. But then Yah trained them in the wilderness, brought them through, and has given them power. And I love the explanation of the hornets, because there's always a deeper meaning to everything. And sometimes you look at things and you go like, why are these big, fearsome giants scared of hornets? Why are the hornets causing them problems? When you put it in the concept of a hive mind, of these Nephilims being able to link themselves through these sort of ways, it explains itself so much better. There's always deeper meaning to what Yah does in this world, and how Yah was guiding and protecting and strengthening the Israelites so they could conquer the Holy Land.
Mhm. Yep, absolutely. The disruption there in that hive mind that Gary's talking about, they always copy what Yah does because that's how the walls of Jericho came down. What did they do? They
Yeah.
marched around and then they blew the shofar. Well, the frequency of the shofar through Yah's guidance is what made the walls come down.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And so when we start to understand everything in context, this is a turning point in history.
Mhm.
It's
It
a
is, yes.
massive turning point in history. And it wasn't going to end just with defeating nations that they had no business defeating.
Right.
It
Mhm.
would continue because, God is letting things play out through free choice.
Mhm.
And just because Israel won that part of the wars doesn't mean it wasn't going to stop the other nations from continuing to try and wipe them from the face of the earth. That's what they're there to do. They were an island in the sea of Gentiles.
Mhm.
The whole world was polytheistic outside the Israelite nation and the country that they were able to expropriate. And into this world, that's where chapter 33, the Holy Covenant, sort of comes in, is that this is a nation of priests bound into a covenant for a
Mhm.
purpose, to bring about the Messiah,
Mhm.
to bring about how, however he was accepted, would the next set of events play out through the curses or the covenant, right?
Mhm.
Unfortunately, all the way through in Israel's history, we get the curses we have to deal with.
You always see secular scholars and historians say, why is it a good thing that Israel went through and massacred all these societies, and killed all these
Yeah.
people? When you put into the context of this, understanding that they were giants, and
Yep.
understanding that if they kept to the covenant, then good things would have come, it
Yep.
explains it in a very nice and coherent way, and you understand it. But Israel broke the covenant, as you can see throughout the rest of the Old Testament, but they were
Yep.
promised something great, and they had to do this to lead to something greater, which the giants were
Yep.
denying.
And Joshua would have announced to all the nations, you have an opportunity to leave.
Yeah.
Would have, and that comes down in sort of the Jewish record of that, but it's consistent with how they produced things, how they did things, right? And again, that is rarely put into the whole context of what is going on there. But we should expect that this world of polytheism that we swim in now, we don't even really have that island except that we create for these spaces for ourselves. They are against the world, against people who follow God. They will always be taking the devil's advocate part of the argument
Mhm.
against Israel. They will create things because they are the enemies of the people who follow God, and they do not want us to reach our destiny. They want their own destiny that is distinctly different as to who's going to rule this world going forward. So in this covenant, there are certain things that were bound in there, you know. Um, and it's the war edict and the going to war edicts that govern that, and I cover that off in the books, and then and then also come back to it in the time of David and Saul in more detail, so that you understand why they're doing it, because the kings were bound into that holy covenant when they were crowned,
Mhm.
versus the judges who are raised to bring Israel back from being punished for breaking the violations, and then you would have a repentance, and then they'd follow the covenant for a while, and then worse things would happen throughout the time of the judges.
Mhm.
And so they were told not to have pity on the people and not to leave anybody in the covenant land. Drive them out, kill them, or ask them to go. Do all three, but don't leave anybody there. But unfortunately, they don't do that.
Right.
And then that's why you have the reignition of the Baalim religion continually eating at the heels of Israel and their spirit and soul throughout the age of the judges and the monarchy. Had they done that in the way that they were asked, one expects a different outcome because they wouldn't be suffering all of the curses of the covenant that come about because they fall back into Baalim worship.
Mhm.
So that's bound into the covenant.
Mhm.
And what's also bound into the covenant is the reconciliation.
Mhm.
That even though you will be punished for not following the covenant, first with the northern kingdom, second with the southern kingdom going to Babylon, third again with after the southern kingdom comes back with the crucifying and rejecting of their Messiah, our Messiah.
Mhm.
The curses of the covenants were bound again, and they're going to be just dispersed around the world, akin to how the northern tribes were, but the visible ones of the southern kingdom remained visible. They weren't lost into the nations.
Mhm.
But both will be redeemed in the end time.
Right.
In the time of the seventh empire and the time of the eighth Antichrist empire. So there's this relationship between the covenant, the beast empires, the history, and prophecy that we need to understand. Just as the feasts of the Lord is like a template for the macro period of Israel and the covenant that they brought on, because these are the feasts of the covenant,
Mhm.
right? And so you have like Jesus coming at the Passover. So you should expect Feast of the First Fruits to have an end time resurrection application. You should expect the Feast of the Trumpets and the relationship with the trumpets and the resurrections and the rapture. You have, the Day of Atonement, all of those. And you'll have again with the second Exodus, with the reconciliation of Israel in the last 3.5 years. That's the Feast of the Tents, the Tabernacles. That's the time of the second Exodus, the time of Jacob's trouble, and time of trouble in Daniel that starts after the abomination. So they have a separate parallel track for reconciliation than what the church does. They'll be merged as the bride at the supper of the Lamb. But again, we need to understand the Holy Covenant, that they're promised second Exodus in the Holy Covenant, even if they violate the covenant, and that there's a set template that they can look at from their celebrations of the Feast of God that gives us a dynamic that works through to the end time. And that the world doesn't want us to understand the Feast of the Lord to give us that macro level. And thus, you see, even in Christianity, for the most part, the feasts of the Lord are not celebrated. Still, the Jewish people are. They may have a little different interpretation of how that's going to play out because they have not yet received Jesus as their Messiah. But we need to understand that the covenant was bound as they left Egypt. And then it was renewed several times and during the time of the conquest of the covenant land. So if we want to understand what was going on in the past, we have to understand the Holy Covenant, the nation of priests and their obligations, and what would happen if they didn't follow it. We could have had a history that looks totally different.
Right.
But our temptation throughout history has been being stiff-necked.
Yeah. And we continue that stiff-neckedness, Gary, because like Dallas was saying earlier, they saw all the miracles and they still did that. Well, we saw all the miracles. We saw the first Exodus. We saw everything that's happened, and we have the written word. And we still migrate to Zoroastrianism, Freemasonry, all this kind of stuff. And we're still stiff-necked and not doing the feast, like you say. Some of us do, but for the most part, they don't celebrate the feast.
And
Gary, that was beautifully said. You managed to blend from the start, the Torah, all the way over to the end times. You managed to blend it perfectly and bring in the Messiah in such a brilliant way and show people how, because people often like to separate off and say the feasts are for the old covenant, it's for all the Jews. Don't worry about that. But second Exodus, the things to come, what's going to happen to us, those feasts, the feasts fall in line with it. You got to look at them. You got to look at it. The Christian world has to look at this. So you did it in a beautiful way, which breaks those boundaries and links them all together.
Yeah, and we all have the example because Shaul and every one of them celebrated the feast. Yahusha celebrated the feast.
The Messiah came in the feast, Yeah.
And we should not accept that prophecy is totally allegorical and we can't look at it that way. When Jesus came the first time, he didn't fill anything allegorically.
Right.
He filled it, all the prophecies, literally. And so we should understand that he's going to do things and have things done in the same kind of way. We have that set down for us to understand, but people use hermeneutics, which is polytheism, used to decode and understand the allegories in polytheist writings, and they adapt that same form to the Bible so they can change the meaning. Why? Part of that outside influence trying to have us not understand how things are going to happen. And when Jesus came and he fulfilled everything in a literal manner, I mean, he was the Lamb of God. I mean, at the Passover, and in the Passover you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So just before the Passover, you remove all of the yeast, which represented a rising or a puffing up in sin, right? So Jesus comes as that sacrifice Passover lamb to remove all the sin. We don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this. We just have to let the Bible read for itself, and it can teach us so many different things. And so when God says in that Holy Covenant, he's going to recall Israel in the end time, the lost ones, by name. And he's going to be the breaker, as Micah calls them, and break them out of the prisons that they're in and lead them from all over the world in an exodus that's going to make the first exodus forgotten and collect them a second exodus to the wilderness for the reconciliation that Ezekiel 37 is talking about. It's a separate parallel track back to the bride that will merge with the church by the time of the supper of the Lamb. And the year of the Lord's favor, or the acceptable year of the Lord, all of this is going to happen with them. That is distinct from the year of the Lord's wrath, or as I like how Isaiah 34 puts it, it is the day of the Lord and the year of recompense for the strife of Israel. Right? So recompense is vengeance and reward. And it's both, because Israel is going to be redeemed in the year of redemption in Isaiah 61 and 63 is talking about, and there's a year of the Lord's wrath, one for the reward of Israel, one for the vengeance of Israel and the church, as you graph that in. But the church is gone by then, right? So
and the beautiful thing about it is we don't have to go through that. Well, we're not, that wrath is not for us. That wrath is for, just like the Yasharel was in Goshen at the time, and all the stuff was going on in Mitzrayim, Israel. I mean, in Egypt, and it wasn't affecting them. We're going to be the same thing in the second Exodus, as you're talking about, mentioning Jeremiah 23, 3-8. You can find all that information.
So look for us to go as the resurrection and the rapture before second Exodus, when Jesus comes again for second Exodus, but before Armageddon, right? So he's going to reconcile Israel in that second Exodus. And in that resurrection, you're going to have judgment and a resurrection that Ezekiel 37 and Daniel 12:1 is talking about. And then there's going to be this year of the Lord's wrath. So Israel is saved from the time of Jacob's trouble in Jeremiah 37, 30 to 31 is a complete, and actually goes to another chapter in for the Exodus, where you get a lot more detail on it. But they're saved from the wrath as well, is my point, right? Because it's part of the bride. It has to be. And another interesting part is people look at, well, what about the people who are beheaded? I know I'm off on a rabbit hole here, but it's kind of interesting, I hope. Is that, after the mark implementation in the last 3.5 years, most people say they're raised in Revelation 24 at the start of the millennium. Well, that's not really what Revelation says. They're reflected there, but their resurrection is shown in Revelation 15, 2-3. Just before the pouring out of the wrath bowls. So even that resurrection happens before the year of the Lord's wrath, which now we'll get the details on in Revelation 16, but you got that being poured out in Revelation 15, 1 and 7. You get the introduction of the wrath bowls foreshadowed in Revelation 14, and then being poured out in Revelation 15, 7. So they are there before as well. So even the ones who aren't going to be worthy to be raptured, when they accept Jesus, will miss the worst part of the great tribulation not seen since creation, or the great affliction not seen since creation, depending on which chapter you're reading in the KJV, whether it's Matthew 24, 21 or Mark 13, 19. Right. So anyways, I know I'm getting into prophecy, but
right, you're getting into a little prophecy, but this is a point where I have to say we can agree to disagree, because I don't believe that there's going to be harpazo or a rapture before all this. I believe we're going to have to go through all this, and I don't believe, that the Shemaiah or heaven was made for us, is for Yah and his angels, because he says in the scripture, the meek shall inherit the earth, and this is why the new Jerusalem will come down and the new heaven will come down here, and that's where the millennial reign will be. Since we're off from the rabbit hole, that's what I believe. So,
well, there are many different views on prophecy.
Absolutely.
But what I'm trying to do is sort of put the details together and how that sort of fits.
I got you.
So we could do actually just a show on different views on prophecy, or several shows. It'd be very, very interesting.
Fill our entire schedule for a year just doing that.
But what we do know, and what most people should agree on, unfortunately they don't, is that Israel is not done forever. And they will accept the Messiah in the last 3.5 years. So, and it was bound into that covenant, and that's really where we sort of set off on when we got down the rabbit hole. But it's an interesting rabbit hole, because nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. That's what that's kind of telling us, right? And we have to understand that it wasn't just Israel who fell away. It wasn't just the people of Judah fell away, but the Christian church has fallen away. In fact, there's going to be a great falling away in the end time. Whether or not you're looking at that from apostasia in 2 Thessalonians 2, or you're looking at that from offended, which is scandalizo in the Greek, which means entice into sin, falling away in apostasy before the abomination. So there's a falling away that we haven't learned yet either. We're almost, as a Christian church, and I should probably say differently on this type of audience, but as generically as a Christian church, we're like the Pharisees. We've turned into the Pharisees that Jesus spoke against, and we need to get back to Scripture in a way that doesn't come from preconceived conclusions, but comes directly from Scripture. Don't let a preconceived belief drive anything on doctrine or prophecy. Let prophecy and doctrine come from the Bible, and particularly sort of what Jesus said. So there's nothing new under the sun in the falling away. I mean, you had Adam and Eve. Things could have been completely different.
Right. Yeah, but like you said earlier, Yah tests us to not for him, because he already knows the beginning from the end. Yah changes not. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. That's why those Israelites died 40 years in the desert. He told Moses that he was going to kill him, and Moses said, give him another chance. Well, Yah still killed him. It just took 40 years, but he said what he said.
Yes.
Yep.
So
And then, so all of this is what's going into what's going to happen at Jericho.
mhm,
And Jericho, is such an interesting sort of account.
mhm,
And so when the Israelites are crossing the Jordan River, they're going to collect big rocks.
mhm,
And they're going to camp at Gilgal, meaning wheel.
mhm,
And they're going to create a circle of stones to represent the 12 tribes. Each tribe was going to take a representative stone, and they set it up. And that's going to be their base camp for the whole campaign. And the first city on the campaign west of the Jordan River is Jericho, famous ancient city with walls that
mhm,
were renowned even for that time,
mhm,
and a city of Canaanites and Amorites, and part of an alliance of Rephaim in the central area, which we had talked about earlier in the show.
mhm,
But we don't understand that symbolism of that circle. When we look at polytheism, everything's a wheel in a circle.
mhm,
I'm not
Mhm.
saying Israel was doing something polytheist. They were making a pronunciation, a statement. And so there's an interesting site at the foot of Mount Hermon,
mhm,
and it's called Gilgal Rephaim, Wheel of the Giants or Wheel of the Spirits, depending on how you want to translate that. And it's in a circular sort of positioning. And this was a holy worship site that went back to the antediluvian times,
mhm,
to as far back as 3500 BC. And in polytheism, there was a circuit or a wheel that the priests would go on. It's the same sort of terminology we get for a judges circuit when they were traveling as judges, or in newly settled areas, circuits of priests in Christianity. But this is what they did in their pilgrimages.
mhm,
They would do them in a circuit. And this wheel is also pictured as the wheel of their holy Sabbaths, where they have 8 holy Sabbaths every 6 weeks through the year, based around the equinoxes and the solstices, and then 6 weeks in between. So, for example, you would have the winter solstice, and then you would have what we know as St. Valentine's Day, but it would have been more Lupercalis in the celebration of those events at that period of time, or May Day after the equinox, right? And Samhain after the equinox in September. So you have 8 of those, and that's represented also, as you see, in the sun disk and the solar dial, and everything is that sun worshiping sort of imagery. And the procession of time is a wheel,
mhm,
just as you have the Aztec wheel. So wheel is Nephilim religion. It is the Zoroastrian religion.
mhm,
And in the land of the Baalim Council, that was met in a ring of gods and a ring of the kings, the Rephaim, that were at the council of the Datanu, the giants in the Ugaritic text. That's the ruling visible council of wherever the Baalim reigned over. And I think probably all over the whole world, but you could view that locally as well if you're not saying that it's the same pantheon all around the world. So there would be just different councils all around the world. However, it gets up to 70, there would be 10 of them if you want to use that sort of analogy from the 7 wandering stars. So, and the 7 holy mountains. So, in polytheism. So, when we look at that wheel, this is something new that God has created, and there's something new with this holy covenant, with this new nation that's set aside from the rest of the world, this nation of priests. that is making a declaration that this holy covenant of our 12 tribes have come, and we are going to remove you from the land, or you can leave. And they attacked and selected the most powerful city-state of that time, although you could make an argument from other words that Gibeon might have been. But by the time the Gibeonites decide they're going to make a treaty with Joshua, Jericho has already fallen, and other great city-states. So you could understand that as the greatest city-state fortress left.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that both ways, and I'm fine either way on it. But Jericho has this renown throughout history, so it has a higher sort of pedigree, and everything about Jericho is representing, from its age to the height of the walls, is this hegemony of giants that ruled both before the flood with its age and with giants, and after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a carryover, and it's a perfect selection for a special sacrifice or a special ritual at the time of Passover, when they're going to start removing sin from the land.
Mm-hmm.
Again, understand how things work in the Bible, and things start to make some sense. So all of a sudden now you have an understanding that this is a statement, and that statement is going to come with marching around the city for a week, for 7 days, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread,
Mm-hmm.
after the Passover, which takes out the sin, the yeast, the
Mm-hmm.
puffing up. The giants are the puffing up. They're sending a message, and that they're also sending a message, just like across from the Jordan River. If you do not come out and fight us, the God of Israel can do whatever he pleases to have you meet the same fate.
Mm-hmm.
Die in the city, die out of the city.
Right.
And so they do this, this 7-day march around with the Ark of the Covenant leading, and they're blowing trumpets. And then on the last day, they're all going to blow the trumpets and shout at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how you get about it, it's either God creating a sound weapon, or the act together. God has taught them to do this, and it's going to create this sound wave weapon that's going to cause the rocks to tumble down. But now the mythos is building about who Israel is and the power of their God that's behind them, that he can cause the greatest city fortress in the covenant land at that time, the oldest city going back into the nether reaches of the time of civilization and the time of the original Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to breach the walls. They came tumbling down and on top of the people who hid in there, and made it very easy for the Israelites to go rushing in. And then on the next cities, like the city of Ai and the other cities, they're all said they were destroyed. How? In like manner.
Mm-hmm.
They were taking on this Amorite Rephaim, probably aligned with the cities on the east side, Og and Sihon and the Midianites, as an important alliance member, or at least working with, and they were taking them down in a way that the people in the land could not even imagine. But even if that didn't happen, they had the ability to get in the walls through fires and other things, as they did with Sihon. And if they came out and fought like Og, the result was the same as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the people of Gibeon understood. They're the only ones who said, this is craziness to try and fight against the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, who's behind the Israelites. So they deceived Joshua to make a treaty. one would expect that they were considering leaving as well, but they didn't. Many tribes did. Many of the peoples, like the Ben Gurg, the Girgashites, left, but not many. A few of them did. But that's now you understand why the Gibeonites and their Pentapoles would say, "Hey, we don't want to fight against Israel. They're just mowing everything down as they go. They are a juggernaut. They cannot be stopped." And so this ritual has so many things that is in it, from the blowing of the trumpets. I mean, blowing of the trumpets is, not only a sounding for war, but like the whole earth is going to be renewed. In the symbolism. And so none of the things that are going on there are to be dismissed. And this is that giant hegemony that comes down through the ages that we have to deal with in the end time. And guess what? There's also the 7 trumpets, right? And this is the days of the trumpet, which are still part of catastrophes versus the wrath. And then they are at 33% destruction versus 25% of the seals, but the wrath would be 100% destruction after that would come. So, but this is part of the catastrophes that are brought on in the end time by those who rule this world. God's wrath is for the tribulation and the persecution brought on not only Israel, but for the Christians and the church. And that's the revenge as that is talked about, that will come on them for doing this against the people of the church, which again, the New Testament talks about. Won't go into the passages, but just to give again a bit of an understanding there that not only was Jericho preternatural, the end times are going to be preternatural when God steps in.
Yeah. And he knows his people. And just like he sealed them before they left, when they were told to take a lamb and to kill that lamb and to put the mark over their doorposts of the Tav. That mark was of the Tav. And us called out people that are his people are sealed. I believe we're sealed already. I believe we're in those times. And it's going to pass over us just like it passed over them.
Yeah, and I think that has a good sort of foreshadowing to the end time, as I think that you're doing. We're sealed by the Holy Spirit, right?
Yes.
And you don't have to have that physical aspect because this is the spiritual sealing.
Right.
And why is that important? Well, there's some nasty things that come out of the pit prison.
Yeah.
That are told not to hurt any of the people that have a seal on their forehead. Well, we know the 144,000 does, right? But if the church isn't raptured by then, I know it's common for a lot of people to believe in rapture before the last 7 years, but if it doesn't, or if you're still here, the only way you could be saved from that 5 months of being persecuted by the scorpion angelic type beings that come out of the pit prison, a fallen angelic, because death will not come, you have to have that seal. I think that is the seal of the Holy Spirit, and it's not for us, it's for the ones bringing tribulation on us as well. And so what's also interesting is that there's an interesting correlation now that I think about it, that happens in the time of the Exodus. And also we get it for the accounting in Numbers. But God reserved all of the firstborn of Israel, and he redeemed them for himself. Very odd language, right? He redeemed them, kept them for himself. We're not really given any more detail on that, but those 144,000 in Revelation 14 are redeemed. And those are from the 12 tribes of Israel, less than in the end time. And the only other people that are redeemed are the 24 elders. that come from the nations in Revelation 4 and 5. So there's a typology going on here. We don't have a solution for why God redeemed those 24, other than maybe it's just part of the covenant or whatever. But did they die? Were they preserved? But all of a sudden now we might have something that comes out of the Holy Covenant and the time of the Exodus and the time of the conquest, that these might be coming back in the end time.
Well, I have a theory on that too, Gary. I believe those 24 elders are the 12 tribes, of Jacob, and the 12 disciples. That's what I believe.
Yep. And we don't get definite answers as to who they are. So everybody who says wants to define them, including myself, has to say, here's what I think and here's why.
Right.
And if you can bring scripture for the typology, it helps a little bit more.
Absolutely.
And so we'll have to wait and see, but they are unique. There is no doubt about it. They are distinct and they are unique. And so we have to sort of look at what I recommend to people is try to define within the Bible and don't create any contradictions.
Right. Yeah, that's why I said that's what I believe. I believe. Yeah.
And at certain point in time, we all get to that point on here's why I believe.
Right.
And if I'm dealing with people on social media or emails, or for having several different people on prophecy, if it comes down to somebody saying, here's what I speculate on, here's my opinion, here's my belief,
right,
I'm not going to argue with that.
Right.
But here's what I believe, and here's the passages and why. And that's how we should do the debate in prophecy, not calling somebody a heretic when if they're using scripture and they're not manipulating scripture, or if they just say that's my belief. If that's just your belief, you don't even need scripture if that's what you truly believe.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. Dallas, where are we at on time?
At time, we got 20 minutes left. We can finish now, or have you got anything else you want to do, Gary? You can continue speaking if you want to.
Yeah, no, I thought I just wanted to table that Jericho was something we should have a closer look at. And the symbolism in Jericho with the sevens and the trumpets and the ritual and the starting of the renewal of the land by taking the land and cleansing it from the giants, again, is a bit of an analogy to the flood cleansing the land of the corruption, where everything was corrupted on the earth. And this is the start of taking what we would say, quote unquote, the covenant land that Israel was going to receive in that time, versus the Nile to the Euphrates and to Mount Hermon to the Red Sea. So this is a cleansing and a start and a statement. And I can't imagine what was running through the average person's head that was in the covenant land and how they were going to deal with this. But it didn't stop the hearts from hardening and saying, no matter what, we are going to carry it out to the end, no matter what the consequences are, to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. Why would you do that and stay? Because you're that loyal to your pantheon. And they knew that in the religion, and the ones who followed the religions, but more importantly, the ones who are the spurious offspring of the fallen angels and their descendants, they knew that's why they were created, just like the giants were created before the flood, to wipe the Adamites from the face of the earth. They're going to carry it out no matter what. And again, most Christians aren't taught this. Like, they were never going to stop. They never did stop. The only thing is Israel could have made it easier on themselves if they had cleansed the land completely, as were the instructions. And only in the land that they were keeping, where they had outside those lands, they had other options not to kill everything and everybody, or to take wives or their plunder. Within that covenant land, it was a different set of rules written within the covenant. And so had they followed that, one would think, a little different history. And they may have not been influenced as easily and may have actually held the covenant. And who knows what would have happened if that was the case, but it did not. But we have to understand what was going on there and what would continue to go on again, and the consequences thereof that we deal with today still.
Well, incredible, Gary. It's an incredible way to look at all of this. It's an incredible viewpoint. It's nice when people get to share their ideas and how they think about things, you know, and it's a pleasure being able to put it on this platform, you know. To think about how things would have gone if they followed the covenant like fully. They fully followed it. They listened to it.
Yeah.
The entire course of the Bible would be different. You know, who knows what happened then?
I wonder whether or not, if the Jerusalem church had continued, if things would have been different, or if polytheism hadn't been mixed in to Christianity with the start of Constantine, would things have been different? I mean, I don't know. I guess our MO is that we're seeing our own indictment of ourselves, that we're going to need the laws of God written on our heart, because no matter what intercession God does, no matter what he permits for things to have for us to have second chances, we always revert, whether it's us or it's Israel.
That is the beauty and the curse of free will. It's the beauty of life, you know.
Yes.
That's how it is.
Yeah. That's what it boils down to. Exactly.
Yep.
We all have choices.
Make the right choices. That's something I've learned. Do the right thing, you know.
Yeah. And because we have a little bit more airtime, it's important to understand all of these events in the time of Israel, because the imagery of a lot of this does get reflected in the end time. We are going to see not just the daughter religion of Babylon in the end time, we're going to see the mother religion, the original Zoroastrianism, the original Enochian mysticism that was before the flood, that's known as also Zoroastrianism. We are going to see the extension of those beast empires that were governed by the descendants of giants resurface in the end time. They're setting up that ancient organizational structure. And they're trying to accomplish world government, as all the beast empires tried to do, as what an antichrist figure, as in what Atlantis was trying to do before the flood. Nothing is new under the sun. When we saw gods and giants walk amongst humans before the flood, we're going to see that somehow, some way in the end time. However that plays out, there's an impact there. And where you had an intercession by God, because of the gods providing so much technology that we've covered off in past shows before the flood, God intercedes to prevent a destruction by fire. In the end time, he doesn't prevent that. There's an ordained time when that has to play out. And that's the destruction by fire that's talked about in 2 Peter 3. And that's, there's 7 years of the 70 weeks promised to Israel yet to be played out. And this is a generation that Jesus talked about. That's the fig tree generation. And the fig tree generation in Old Testament prophecy, starting in the book of Joshua, but you got passages in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, they refer to Israel as the vine and the grape. And they refer to the southern kingdom as the fig and the fig tree. So the analogy of Jesus is providing people of the fig tree, the figs of the disciples, when he walks up to a fig tree that bears no fruit, so he curses it. They know what he's talking about. That's why they're so fearful. So after he goes into the temple and they see what he does there at the Olivet discourse, just before Jesus gives it, because the disciples ask him to, they say, when will the temple be destroyed, from what he had just said, after cursing the fig tree, and when will Jerusalem be destroyed? And when will that happen? And when will the sign of your coming in the end time be? They're asking for that. So you get the details, and then you get the allegory, prophetic allegory, when you see the fig tree. This generation will not pass away until all these things happen. So now we start to understand what's going to happen in the end time. We understand why we need to understand a little bit more of Israelites' history, and that that generation is inclusive of the last 7 years. And Jesus provides an oration that has split in the middle with the abomination. And for people who think that abomination happened in 180 to 200 AD, as they like to wipe away Daniel 11 to say that that's talking about that, even though you got the rise from 21 to 31 of Antichrist and the deeds after the abomination. Jesus recommends, instructs, tells us to, in Matthew 24, in Luke 21, and Mark 13, after he describes the abomination, to go read Daniel to understand all of the events. So every abomination, one that's covered in Daniel, has typology in each of those that are there in all of the Daniel prophecies, and what shows up in what Jesus is talking about, and that Jesus would not predict the abomination that happened 200 years before. That's not a prophecy. And there is a specific generation that all of those events are going to happen. So when we look at that, we start to understand the implications of when things come to be fulfilled in the end time. There's a separate track for Israel than there is for the church, and we do not want to conflate those prophecies if we want to understand it properly. And everything's got to fit without any contradiction, and that it will merge. But Jesus is talking to the elect, not just his disciples, but as elect is defined in the New Testament as Christians. And that Paul calls us Christians as the elect. Peter calls us Christians as the elect. He's talking as the Alpha and the Omega to both. And both are going to need it, particularly as we get into the end time, because Israel's got to be reconciled. And it's going to be Jesus who they accept as their Redeemer. And all of that's got to come to play out.
Well said, Gary. Very well said. It's been a pleasure listening to you speak about Canaan today, and then going into prophecy towards the end. I enjoy so greatly hearing your opinions on this sort of stuff. It's always nice hearing fresh looks and fresh opinions on things. And we may differ on certain beliefs and everything, but it's still the idea of respect for everything. And it's understanding of everything is based in the scriptures, and it's reading it and understanding what you can pull out from it. So I love hearing what you think about things. I love hearing the tremendous work you go through to write the Genesis 6 conspiracy theory, and also to link it all together and to come here and tell us it all again. I respect it totally.
Well, I thank you for those words. And, what I try and do with prehistory and with prophecy is to create more curiosity to go dig deeper for yourself. That's what I want people to do. I want you to you need to know why you believe what you believe.
Yeah.
Even though I said you don't need anything to believe that. I believe that too, but I think you should know why you believe what you believe.
Mm-hmm. That's agreed. Be like the Bereans. Go see for yourself.
Yeah, verify it for yourself.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you, Gary. This has been an incredible program. Stacy, can I ask you to lead us out in prayer?
Absolutely. Thank you, Gary, once again. What a great discussion we had. Heavenly Father, we come to you once again this evening, giving you thanks, praise, honor, and glory. Thank you for another opportunity to sit down and break bread with our brother Gary. We thank you for the words that went forth here. And we pray right now that everyone would receive according to their belief. We thank you. We give you all the praise, all the glory, and all the honor. In the mighty name of Yahushua Mashiach, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
That was a good program, everyone. Well, for the online audience, thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoyed Gary's teachings today. I believe we're going to be back on the normal schedule again, so we'll see you in, what is it, 2 weeks from now, Gary, isn't it? Is that the normal schedule?
2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now. Yeah, EWHAL in November, there'll be a little bit of different scheduling because we're doing the Way, the Truth, and the Life exhibit. So scheduling may be a little bit different, but Gary Wayne should be on normal times as it always is. But thank you, everyone, for joining, and I hope you guys have a lovely evening and the rest of your day, depending on where you are. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.